At 17, my mom and her affair partner kicked me out. Then my dad's lawyer called about a trust fund. Suddenly they wanted to adopt me. So I made sure they got nothing. Sup Reddit. My mom's affair partner convinced her to kick me out at 18. Middle of November, 38 degrees, duffel bag, and a dying phone. Nobody came after me. 20 male, now. Writing this from a studio apartment with a mattress on the floor and a 3.6 GPA. I've never told this story start to finish. Every ugly chapter, every calculated move, every moment where I had to choose between being someone's doormat and being the guy who walks away with his spine intact. Let me rewind. My dad's truck was gone on a Tuesday. I came downstairs at 6:15 a.m., early shift at the warehouse where I loaded pallets and ran inventory after school. The driveway was empty on his side. I did a room-by-room sweep and got the same answer everywhere. Closet. Cleared. The garage pegboard where he kept 20 years of hand tools organized by type. Bare. The photo of us at Mount Rushmore. Me at 12, sunburned, him squinting with his arm around my shoulder, gone from the hallway wall. Just a nail and a darker rectangle where the frame used to live. Mom was at the kitchen table. Not crying, not talking, just sitting there with a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. I asked where Dad was. She said, "He's gone." 2 words, no explanation. Like she was reporting the weather. My brother Cody was 14. Kid lived in a parallel universe of basketball highlights and Discord servers. He didn't notice Dad was missing for almost 3 days. Cody was Mom's favorite. Always had been. The one she lit up for, bragged about, never missed a game. Me? I was the kid who kept the house running and got nods instead of thank yous. After Dad vanished, Mom went to work, came home, and disappeared into her phone. I ran the house because somebody had to. But here's the thing I didn't catch at the time. About 3 weeks after Dad left, I walked into the kitchen late one night, and Mom was on the phone, laughing. Not the hollow, going through the motions laugh of a woman whose husband just disappeared. A real laugh. Low, warm, private. The kind you save for someone specific. When she heard my footstep, she went silent mid-sentence and said, "I have to go." I asked who it was. She said, "Work stuff." At 11 p.m. on a Thursday. I filed it away and didn't think about it again until everything else started making sense. 8 weeks after Dad vanished, she sat me and Cody down and told us she was getting married to a man named Sully. She was smiling when she said it. A big, giddy smile, like she'd been sitting on good news for weeks and couldn't hold it anymore. Cody was immediately on board. New stepdad, new energy, probably new stuff. I sat there doing arithmetic that didn't work. 8 weeks. You don't go from catatonic to bridal in 8 weeks unless the timeline started way before the math suggests. That late-night phone call. The way she'd been checking her phone constantly, angling the screen away from me. The time I saw the name S in her recent contacts and thought nothing of it. I said nothing. I was still the good kid. The wedding was fast. Backyard, maybe 25 people, almost all Sully's crowd. No one from Dad's side. Cody was in the front row already calling Sully Dad, like the word was a party favor. I stood in the back, clocked the timeline, and counted the minutes until I could leave. I had Sully figured out inside of 30 seconds. Early 50s, decent shape, drove a leased Audi Q5 he talked about like it was a personality trait. He worked as a regional director for a medical device company, the kind of guy who understood how to control a room without raising his voice. From day one, he wanted me gone. When Mom was in the room, Sully was flawless, charming, attentive, textbook stepfather performance. But the moment she left, the mask dropped. He'd look at me like I was a problem he was working on solving. Cold. Evaluating. It started subtle. Comments about how I didn't seem to respect the new dynamic. How I needed to adjust my attitude in his house. His house. The house my dad had paid the mortgage on for 16 years. But I kept my mouth shut. Mom was functioning again. Cody was stable. And I had 6 months until graduation. I could outlast this. Then came the wedding night. The reception had barely ended. Paper plates still stacked on the folding tables. Cody passed out on the couch. When Sully pulled Mom into the hallway, I could hear them from the kitchen. His voice was low and methodical, hers uncertain at first, then agreeable. 20 minutes later, Mom called me into the living room. She stood next to Sully, his hand on the small of her back like a stabilizer keeping her upright. She told me they decided it would be best for everyone if I found my own living situation. I waited for her to laugh. She didn't. Sully laid out his case like he was running a quarterly review. I was creating friction. My resistance to the new family structure was putting stress on their marriage. Then he leaned forward and said, "I want to be clear. This isn't a discussion. You have until Sunday to make arrangements. After that, you're trespassing on private property, and I'll handle it accordingly." Trespassing. In my own home. I looked at Mom. She wasn't avoiding eye contact. She was reinforcing him. She looked right at me and said, "This is what's best for the family. You'll understand when you're older." Said to her 18-year-old son standing in his own living room being told to leave by a man who'd been in the house for less than a day. She wasn't weak in that moment. She was making a choice, clearly, deliberately, and she wanted me to know it. That was the whole conversation. No negotiation, no appeal, just a verdict delivered by a man who'd been part of my life for less time than most magazine subscriptions, and a mother who co-signed it without flinching. I went to my room and packed clothes, laptop, a few books, chargers, and the watch Dad gave me for my 16th birthday. A Citizen Eco Drive with an engraving on the back. Build something. Dad. I almost left it. Something about carrying a gift from a man who'd abandoned me felt wrong. But at the last second, I shoved it in my bag. Couldn't explain why. I walked out the front door at 11:40 p.m. on a Wednesday night. November. 38 degrees. Thin jacket, duffel bag, phone at 9%. Nobody came after me. The only person who picked up was my Aunt Denise, Dad's older sister. I hadn't spoken to her in months because Mom had been quietly cutting off Dad's entire side of the family, something she'd started doing even before Dad left, and went full scorched earth with once he was gone. Blocked numbers, declined invitations, redirected mail, a clean amputation. But Denise didn't hesitate. She told me to come over. When I showed up at her door close to midnight with a duffel bag, looking like I hadn't slept in a week, she pulled me inside without a single question and made up the guest room. Denise was good people, blunt, practical, zero tolerance for nonsense. Her husband was a plumber, quiet, hardworking, clearly unsure what to do with a displaced 18-year-old crashing his spare bedroom on a school night. They had 2 kids under 8 and a tight budget. I made myself as small as possible, ate less than I needed, showered fast, kept my stuff in the duffel bag like I might need to leave at any moment. Denise noticed. She started leaving protein bars on the nightstand without saying anything. That hit me harder than anything Sully said. I re-enrolled myself for my final semester. New bus route, 45 minutes each way, running on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. Got a job at a Greek diner off the state highway. $12.50 an hour plus tips, which on a Tuesday lunch shift meant about $11 in crumpled singles from retirees and truckers. I bussed tables, ran dishes, mopped floors, and took nonstop grief from a line cook whose entire vocabulary was insults and spatula gestures. My sneakers permanently smelled like gyro grease and industrial sanitizer. 3 weeks into the job, Sully found me. Not in person, by phone. He called the diner directly and told the manager he was a concerned family member and that I was an unstable young man going through a mental health crisis who shouldn't be trusted around kitchen equipment. The manager, a guy who had zero patience for drama, didn't fire me, but he cut my hours by half while he figured out the situation. That cost me about $380 in a 2-week stretch, which doesn't sound like much unless your entire financial plan is built on diner wages and desperation math. I spent 3 days eating nothing but the free bread the line cook tossed me during shifts. The manager eventually restored my hours after I explained the situation, and he decided Sully was full of it. But for those 2 weeks, I was operating on a margin so thin, a parking ticket would have broken me. Then, about 6 weeks in, Mom showed up at the diner. Friday lunch rush. She was dressed nice, nicer than a random diner visit warranted, with a folder tucked under her arm. She spotted me before I could duck into the kitchen and walked over. She hugged me, right there between the tables, in front of regulars, in front of the line cook watching through the kitchen window. I stood there with a bus tub in my hands and let it happen because making a scene at my workplace wasn't an option. Then she launched into her pitch. She said she'd been so worried. She wanted to help with some paperwork, health insurance, updating my information, just some forms that needed my signature. She pulled the folder out and started opening it right there on a diner table between someone's half-eaten moussaka and a glass of iced tea. I told her this wasn't the time or place, that I was working, and that I'd call her later. She pushed, just a quick signature. It would only take a second. I walked away. She left the folder on the table. I looked at the folder after she left. Inside was a stack of forms. Most of them looked like standard medical paperwork at first glance, but buried in the middle was a general financial authorization form that would have given her access to manage banking and financial accounts on my behalf. At the time, I barely had a savings account with a few $100s in it, so it seemed almost pointless. But that's how these things work. You get the signature first and figure out what to use it on later. She'd sandwiched it between legitimate-looking insurance documents like a card trick. I kept the folder, didn't sign anything, started keeping records of everything. Around the same time, Denise told me, carefully, like she was delivering bad news to a patient, that Mom had called her. Told her I'd chosen to leave, that I'd been hostile and aggressive towards Sully, that I was going through something and might be unstable. Denise didn't buy it for a second, but the fact that Mom was out there flipping the whole story, I got kicked out, and she was telling people I chose to leave. I was quiet the entire time, and somehow that made me unstable, told me exactly what kind of game she was playing. I also found out she'd told Cody I didn't want to talk to him right now, and that I was angry at the family. She'd cut the line between us and told each side the other one didn't care. Textbook triangulation. And on a 14-year-old, it worked perfectly. I saved every dollar I could. Denise refused rent money every time I tried. Opened a savings account at the credit union and watched the balance grow in amounts so small they were almost insulting. Eventually, scraped together enough to buy a beat-up sedan off a guy Denise's husband knew. No AC, check engine light permanently on, but it ran, and it was mine. 3 months of bus fumes, diner grease, 4-hour sleep cycles, and a loneliness you can feel in your teeth. I was running on discipline and spite in roughly equal proportion. Then one morning at the diner, wiping down the counter before the breakfast rush, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. The voice was calm, precise, and completely unexpected. Said he was my father's attorney. Said my dad wanted to meet with me about something financial. My hand tightened on the phone so hard the case creaked. Your father has requested a meeting, he said. At your earliest convenience. I almost hung up. The man had been gone for over 5 months. Vanished. Left me to catch every piece of falling debris while he ghosted his own family. Whatever he had to say was long past relevant. But I went, because the part of me that needed answers was louder than the part that wanted to slam the door. The attorney's office was on the 4th floor of a downtown building. The receptionist walked me to a conference room. Dad was already there. He looked like someone had run him through a time-lapse filter set to decay. 20 pounds lighter, maybe more. Gray skin. His hands trembled on the table and his eyes were wet before either of us opened our mouths. I sat across from him, arms crossed, jaw set, and made it clear with every inch of body language that this meeting was going to cost him. He started talking. Messy, unscripted, stumbling over his own words. He said he was sorry enough times that the word lost its shape, but he also said specific things. Missing my shifts at the warehouse, not being there when I passed my driving test. He knew my shift schedule at the diner. He knew I'd been bussing tables 5 nights a week. That messed me up more than the apology did. The idea that he'd been tracking my life while doing exactly nothing to help. Then he told me the truth. 7 months before he left, he'd been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Stage 4. The doctors had caught it late. He'd been ignoring the fatigue, the weight loss, the persistent pain he'd written off as stress. By the time the scans came back, it was bad. The doctors were talking months, not years. He said he made the decision to leave because he couldn't stomach the idea of his kids watching him disintegrate. That disappearing clean was merciful. That leaving us as an intact family was better than staying and making everyone watch. The logic was insane. You don't protect people by vanishing. You don't prevent pain by creating a different, worse kind of pain. But sitting across from him, seeing the conviction in his wrecked face, I could tell he believed it completely. He'd gotten the worst news of his life, and his first instinct was to shield us from it. Delusional? Absolutely. But it came from something real, which is more than anyone else in my family was offering. Then he told me the part that made everything click. Before he left, he'd discovered that Mom and Sully had been together. Not after he disappeared. Not in some ambiguous gray zone. For months, possibly longer. Mom had been seeing Sully while Dad was sitting in oncology, waiting rooms getting told how long he had left. And when Dad confronted her, she pivoted. She told him his illness would complicate the family situation, that it would be easier for the kids if he stepped aside quietly. She convinced a dying man, a man at his absolute lowest, that his own family was better off without him. He bought it, he packed a bag, he left. And Mom had Sully moved in before Dad's scent faded from the pillowcases. The attorney waited for us to pull it together, then moved on to business. Despite everything, Dad had been working remotely through treatment, consulting work in logistics and supply chain management, his actual field. Smart investments he'd been making for 20-plus years had been growing the whole time. He'd been building a financial structure from his hospital bed, and he wanted it to go to me, a trust fund, managed by the attorney's firm. Substantial enough to cover a monthly living stipend, full college tuition at a state university, and a reserve that would unlock at 25. Structured carefully, no lump sum access, no co-signers, no one but me and the trustee with authority over a single dollar. I signed the paperwork, shook the attorney's hand, looked at my father one last time before I walked out. He was crying, quietly, not for himself. I hugged him, and it felt like he needed it. I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly an hour without starting the engine. I moved out of Denise's house within 2 weeks. Before I left, I sat her and her husband down and told them exactly what their help had meant. Not a generic thank you. I was specific. The midnight phone call, the protein bars, the fact that she never once made me feel like a burden even when I obviously was. She cried. Her husband shook my hand and said, "You've got a good head, kid. Use it." I intended to. Found a studio apartment, 380 square feet, kitchenette that was more of a concept than a room, window overlooking a tire shop parking lot. But my name was on the lease, my key in the lock. That first night I lay on a mattress on the floor and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not peace exactly, just quiet. Like my brain finally stopped running threat assessments. Enrolled at community college. Kept my shifts at the diner because sitting around spending trust money without earning anything myself felt wrong. Visited dad at the care facility 3 times a week. Some days we talked, school, the apartment, a documentary series about failed bridge engineering he was binging on loop. Other days we just sat there. We were trying to rebuild something. Some days it worked. One afternoon he pulled up his investment portfolio on a tablet. Index funds, a handful of individual positions, 2 tech stocks that had performed aggressively well. He walked me through his reasoning, entry points, risk tolerance, why he'd sold certain positions and held others. A masterclass in financial strategy from a man running a brokerage account from a hospital bed. Money's a tool, he said, not an identity. Don't confuse the two. About 10 days into the new apartment, the first move came. Someone attempted to open a credit card in my name using my social security number. The application was flagged and denied because the address listed didn't match mine. It matched Mom and Sully's house. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus within the hour and filed a report with the FTC. 2 weeks later, the second move. Cody texted me a photo of a document, said it was a school registration form that Mom needed me to sign. It wasn't a school form. It was a general power of attorney template, partially filled in, with Mom's name as the designated agent. Someone had done a better job this time. Cleaner formatting. Letterhead close to the real school districts. But, hereby grant full authority to manage financial, legal, and medical decisions is not how a school enrollment form reads. They were learning from their mistakes. That scared me more than the first attempt. I screenshotted everything, forwarded it to my attorney. Didn't respond to Cody. Then came the coach text from Cody himself. Casual at first. Miss you, bro. How's the new place? But within days, the questions got surgical. Where was my apartment? How was I paying for it? Was I going to college now? The questions didn't sound like a 14-year-old's curiosity. They sounded rehearsed. After that, it turned into a cycle. Paperwork tricks, soft threats, fake concern, and Cody used like a messenger pigeon. Then the bank account got temporarily frozen. Someone tried to initiate an electronic transfer using credentials that were close to correct, but not quite right. The bank's fraud department caught it and locked everything. Standard procedure. Except standard procedure meant I spent an entire day with zero access to my money. Couldn't buy groceries. Couldn't put gas in the car. Couldn't do anything except sit in a credit union branch, filling out paperwork, while a fraud specialist walked me through recovery. I spent that day broke and furious. Heartbreak is a luxury when you're calculating gas money and rent in the same breath. Then, it got personal. I was at my apartment studying for a midterm when someone knocked on the door. The authoritative 3-hit kind that makes your stomach drop before you even stand up. 2 police officers. They'd received a call from a concerned family member reporting that I was potentially a danger to myself and living in unstable conditions. They asked to come inside, asked if I had weapons, asked if I was having thoughts of hurting myself. I cooperated, let them in, showed them the apartment, clean, organized, textbooks on the desk. One of the officers looked around and you could see him doing the math. This doesn't match the call. They took my statement, gave me a case reference number, and left. But my landlord had seen the squad car. He called that evening and said he didn't want any trouble. The implication was clear. One more visit, and he'd find a reason to end the lease. I spent an hour on the phone assuring him it was a false report, basically auditioning to keep the apartment I was already paying for on time every month. I told my attorney everything. He added it to the file. I changed banks, set up new security, and established a dedicated email address that only the attorney's office and the trust administrator had access to. Dad's reaction when I told him was a single tired sentence. Now you see what she is. A week later, she proved him right again. Mom showed up at my community college's registrar office, told the front desk she was my mother, and needed to verify my enrollment status and financial aid information. The registrar, bless FERPA, told her they couldn't release any student information without my written consent. Mom didn't take it well, started crying, told the staff I was in a bad situation, and she was just trying to help her son. When that didn't work, the tears dried up fast, and she switched to demanding a supervisor. Campus security eventually walked her out. I found out because the registrar flagged it and emailed me a courtesy notice. The next day, Cody texted me something that made my vision narrow. Mom told me you've been doing drugs and that's why you moved out. She said you need help. On drugs. That was the new narrative. Not chose to leave, not unstable, on drugs. Whatever version of me she needed me to be to justify what they were doing, she'd build it from scratch and sell it to a kid who didn't know any better. I didn't respond. I screenshotted it, added it to the file. The call from Sully came on a Thursday evening. He wanted to meet. Said it was about Cody, about family stuff that needed to be discussed in person. I told him I wasn't interested. He said Cody had been struggling, acting out at school, pulling away from friends. That was the lever, and he knew exactly where to place it. I agreed to meet at a coffee shop the next day. Expected Sully alone. Walked in and saw Mom, Sully, and Cody in a corner booth. Ambush, of course. Sully spoke first. Full performance. He said he'd been insecure, that he'd projected his own baggage onto me, that he'd manipulated Mom into seeing me as a threat, that he'd done some real work on himself. Translation, he'd practiced lying with a straighter face. Same function, better delivery. Then came the ask. Sully said he wanted to adopt me, legally, to formalize the family and correct the mistake of pushing me out. Then he said something that stripped away every pretense in the room. This is really about protecting the family's assets and making sure everyone is taken care of under one roof. The family's assets. My trust fund, set up by my dying father, managed by my attorney, funded by my father's work. And Sully just called it the family's assets, like it was a shared bank account he had a right to audit. He didn't see me as a person. I was a password that could talk. He didn't want to be my dad. He wanted to be my access code, which is not something new since they kicked me out. He reached across the table. I pulled my hand back before he got close. Mom was nodding like she was watching a marriage proposal. Cody looked up at me with those younger brother eyes, all desperate hope and zero context. I let the silence sit. I need to think about it, I said. Calm, neutral, giving nothing. Then I left, but not before I did something deliberate. On my way out, I stopped and said, casually, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, my attorney's office set up a new email portal for trust-related correspondence. If anyone in the family needs to reach out about paperwork or whatever, they can use that channel." I gave Mom a made-up email address, one that my attorney and I had set up for exactly this. A dead inbox that existed for one reason, to see if someone from that household would try to use it to get to the trust. I said it like it didn't matter, like I wasn't baiting a hook. Honestly, I wanted them to fall for it. It took Sully 11 days. My attorney's office logged an email from a Gmail account, registered under a slight misspelling of my name, close enough to be confusing, different enough to be deniable, sent to the decoy address. The email, written in stiff, legalish language that sounded like someone had Googled how to talk to a trust administrator, claimed to be from a family representative and asked for a meeting about beneficiary coordination and guardianship alignment. It name-dropped Cody's age and my recent transition to independent living as excuses to request a family review of the trust. The attorney's paralegal traced the Gmail account's recovery email to an address associated with Sully's LinkedIn profile. Not a burner, not a throwaway. Sully's actual digital footprint, 2 clicks deep, sitting right there. A few days later, Cody showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I still don't know how he got the address. When I opened the door, there he was, backpack on, looking like he'd rehearsed a speech on the bus ride over. He said he missed me. He said Mom was sad all the time. He said Sully had been really trying. Then he said something that stopped me cold. Sully says if you come back and do the adoption thing, he can help you manage your money, so you don't have to worry about it. A 15-year-old, parroting a grown man's financial pitch word for word, not understanding what he was being used for. That's when whatever tiny part of me was still giving them the benefit of the doubt just died. They were using my brother as a courier, feeding him scripts, deploying a kid to do the dirty work of a con. Neither of them had the guts to run face-to-face. I didn't take it out on Cody. I made him a sandwich, let him play a game on my laptop for an hour, and drove him home without saying a word about Sully or the trust. When I dropped him off, Mom was standing on the porch trying to look casual, like she hadn't orchestrated the whole visit. I didn't get out of the car, didn't wave, just waited until Cody was inside, then drove away. I stopped arguing and started documenting. Arguing is for people who still believe shame works. 4 months passed. I went quiet. They didn't. I logged everything, every text, every voicemail, every just checking in message that was really just recon. Meanwhile, I pulled a 3.6 GPA at community college, kept visiting dad whose condition had stabilized, and let them think my silence meant I was coming around. My attorney's file was finished. The credit fraud attempt with the FTC report and case number, the forged POA disguised as a school form, with metadata pointing to their address, the bank transfer attempt, flagged by fraud, the false police report and wellness check, the decoy email traced directly to Sully's digital profile, the registrar incident, 6 documented incidents of fraud, identity theft, impersonation, and attempted financial manipulation, all aimed at me and my trust. Every single one a criminal offense on its own. Together, a pattern so clean it practically filed itself. My attorney had also contacted Sully's employer, not to make accusations, but to file a formal compliance inquiry. In his industry, compliance doesn't play. People at his level are held to integrity standards. A documented pattern of fraud, even without filed charges, was enough to trigger an internal review once formally submitted. He didn't file criminal charges. He filed a compliance packet. And compliance investigations don't require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They require enough documented concern. We had more than enough. I also filed a formal police report. Case number assigned, detective contacted, statement given. The detective told me cases like this moved slow and rarely led to prosecution unless the dollar amounts were significant. That was fine. I didn't need a conviction. I needed a case number. Case numbers attached to names. They follow people into background checks. They don't expire. When the file was done and every piece was exactly where my attorney and I wanted it, I arranged the meeting. Their house. Their turf. I wanted them relaxed, confident, thinking I'd come around. I showed up with my attorney, both in business casual, him carrying a briefcase that could end their play in one sitting. I knocked on the door of the house I used to call home. Mom opened it. I watched her face go from surprised to confused to scared when she saw my attorney, and then she landed on this forced, hopeful smile. She let us in. Sully was already standing in the living room. Power position, feet planted, projecting authority. Cody was on the couch, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Sully started immediately. Hey, glad you came. Knew you'd come around. He gestured to the chairs. Sit down, let's talk next steps. I didn't sit. There aren't next steps, I said. There are consequences. The smile on Sully's face didn't drop. It froze, like a screensaver that hadn't caught up to the input. My attorney opened his briefcase and laid it out. Methodically, the way you present findings in a boardroom, which I figured Sully would appreciate given his professional background. 6 documented incidents. The credit card application using my SSN, traced to their address. The forged POA created on their home network. The bank transfer attempt. The false wellness check that brought police to my apartment. The decoy email traced to Sully's own LinkedIn recovery address. And the college registrar visit, where campus security escorted Mom out after she tried to access my records. Every single one either a criminal offense or documented harassment. Together, a case file that would make any prosecutor's afternoon. My attorney also mentioned, almost as an aside, that a formal compliance inquiry had been filed with Sully's employer 3 weeks prior. Sully's face changed for the first time. Not panic. Recognition. He knew what a compliance investigation meant in his industry. Internal audits, suspended authority, administrative leave while the review played out. His name was now in a file in his company's legal department, and in an industry where regulatory trust is the product, that file doesn't close clean. You can't do that, Sully said. First time I'd ever heard his voice without its polished coating. Raw. Stripped. Already done, my attorney said. Filed and acknowledged. As if on cue, and I swear this wasn't staged, but the timing was surgical. Sully's phone buzzed on the side table. He glanced at it reflexively. I watched his eyes scan the screen. I watched the color leave his face in real time. He didn't say what it was. He didn't have to. The compliance department works on its own schedule, and apparently that schedule had just delivered. Mom started crying. She kept saying she didn't know. She didn't know about the credit application. She didn't know about the emails. She didn't know Sully was trying to access the trust. You didn't know Dad was dying either, I said. You didn't know Sully was manipulating you into kicking out your own son. You didn't know someone was forging legal documents and sending them through your kid's phone. That's a lot of not knowing for someone who always seems to know exactly what she wants. She didn't have an answer for that. And for the first time, she didn't try the tears again. She just went still. Like the script had ended, and she didn't have the next page. I said what I came to say. Here's what's happening. You're not adopting me. You're not accessing the trust. You're not getting a dime. Not now. Not ever. The compliance inquiry is active. The police report is open with an assigned case number. The FTC fraud report is documented. A cease and desist will arrive by certified mail within the week. If anyone, you, Mom, Cody, anyone acting on your behalf, contacts my attorney's office, attempts to access my accounts, or approaches me regarding the trust in any capacity, we file criminal charges, identity theft, fraud, forgery. The file is complete. The only reason charges haven't been filed is because I'm choosing not to file them today. That choice has an expiration date, and I'm not telling you when it is. I turned to Cody. He was curled into the corner of the couch, knees pulled up, making himself small. 16 years old and caught in the middle of something he never asked to be part of. Hey, I said, quieter. None of this is your fault. You know that, right? He looked up at me, and for the first time, he didn't look like a kid repeating someone else's script. He looked like a kid who was finally hearing something that was actually meant for him. They told me you left because you didn't want to be around us, he said. Small voice. Breaking. I didn't leave, I said. I was told to go. There's a difference. And when you're old enough to see all of it clearly, call me. I'll pick up. Sully reached for Cody's shoulder. Instinctive, possessive, and Cody flinched away from his hand. Small movement, but I saw it. And Sully saw that I saw it. My attorney and I left. The cease and desist arrived 4 days later, signed for by Sully himself. 2 weeks after the confrontation, he was placed on leave. The compliance investigation, once opened, found other stuff. Padded mileage, double-billed client events, minor things nobody would have looked at twice without a microscope already on him. But that's the thing about compliance investigations. They don't stay in their lane, they spread. By month's end, Sully was out. Mutually agreed separation, corporate speak for they let him resign before they made it public. No severance, no reference letter. In an industry where your name is your resume, he was now the guy who got quietly pushed out under a regulatory cloud. Good luck explaining that gap in your next interview. One more thing. After the cease and desist, Sully called the trust administrator's office directly. One last try. The receptionist recognized his voice and said 5 words. This call is being recorded. He hung up. That was the last contact anyone in that household made with my legal team. Some doors don't close with a slam. They close with a click. I drove past the house exactly once to drop off a birthday card for Cody. The Audi was gone, replaced by a 10-year-old sedan parked crooked in the driveway, like it was bought in a hurry from whoever was closest. The house Dad paid for, that Sully claimed as his, looked a lot different without the Audi money lifestyle propping it up. Mom called once after the cease and desist. I let it go to voicemail. 40 seconds of mostly silence, punctuated by, I'm sorry. I saved it. Not because it moved me. Documentation is a habit now. I'm writing this from my apartment. It's late. Radiators clanking. Community college wraps next semester, and I'm transferring to state in the fall. Business administration with a minor in finance. Turns out watching your dying father outperform the market from a hospital bed teaches you more than any classroom will. GPA's a 3.6. Not bad for a guy who was scraping gyro grease off diner floors 2 years ago. Dad's still here. Still stubborn. As for Mom and Sully, I don't think about them. The paperwork is filed. The drawers are locked. Whatever happens to them isn't my problem. They made their choices. I made mine. The difference is mine came with receipts. And Cody, the offer stands. When he's ready, I'll pick up. But I'm done chasing anyone. Not for love, not for family, not for anything. That version of me is gone. They kicked me out when I had nothing. Came crawling back when I had something. Funny how that works. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.